So guys, we found a true story about this girl that says she was born and raised inside of prison. We're gonna see if it's real or fake right now.
Some prisoners die dreaming about the moment their feet will touch free ground, but not me.
Wow.
I was the only prisoner who didn't want to get out of prison. I know that you might be curious to know what the charge was that landed me up in prison, but I don't even have an answer for that, as I was put in prison without one.
So this girl was apparently born there, but this sounds possible already. Like I'm sure somewhere around the world, like this has happened. So I'm sold already.
Most of my life in prison, I didn't stay in there forever. My family and friends are all in prison, but that did not necessarily mean that I had to stay there as well.
What?
It took a lot of guts for me to get out of prison, but going back in, without a doubt, even harder to do.
You got out and then you came back in? You got my curiosity to 10 right now.
Mom was only 16 when she went to prison. Dreams vanished into thin air when she pointed a gun at a burglar that broke into her house to scare him off. It was her first time to ever hold a gun, and she didn't know how to use it. All she knew was that her mom had put the gun in her hands. She was terrified and trembling as the burglar took her money and attempted to escape through the window right in
Isn't this called stand your ground? I'm pretty sure you're allowed to do this in America, so now it's definitely not America.
front of her. The money that the burglar tried to steal was all she had, and she was keeping it for the baby that was growing inside her, which was the
Wait, I'm sorry, you say what now?
reason for her mom's rage in the first place. On the one hand, there was a voice that spoke to her in the last moment before she pulled the trigger.
Oh
It told
boy.
her, don't do it. It's wrong.
Oh my
and then there
gosh.
was my grandmother's voice saying, do it. And the voice
Oh,
of
what's
the
wrong
burglar on
with
the
your
other
grandma?
end of the barrel
Why is she so
begging her,
mean?
don't do it. It was then that my grandmother screamed at her,
gosh.
telling her that she was a useless coward. She no longer heard anything, neither the voice of the burglar nor the voice of her mom, not even the voice coming from within her. All that she heard was the sound of the gunshot that
I just got goosebumps.
Oh my god, I don't know. Can you see the goosebumps?
still rings loud in her ears even to this day.
Okay, that's
Nobody in
horrifying.
the police station believed her when she told them that she didn't mean to do it, and all that she remembers was hearing all those voices, and then the image of the burglar lying in a pool of his
Oh my
own blood.
gosh.
The last words that my mom heard from her mom were, "You will always be a bad girl."
Yo, what's wrong with your grandma is psychologically inside your brain in a way that I don't understand.
Prison. If she
Isn't
was
that like-
lucky, she would get out of prison by the time she turned 40. But my mom isn't very lucky. You might be thinking, how could a 16-year-old girl be imprisoned while she was still a minor? So let me explain. There are 2 states that allow the imprisonment
You do not go into this much detail on a lie, okay? This to me feels so real.
of those who are between 16 and 17 years of age, as they consider them to be adults. And as if that wasn't already bad enough, she also had to deal with having a mean mom, and at the same time, being 4 months pregnant. She had lived her whole life in a hostile environment, and now it looked like she would die in one too. Even if the place she was in was different, it wouldn't matter. And as for me, well, my luck wasn't much better than my mom's was. I was in her womb throughout all of this.
God, I forgot who we were even talking about. I thought this was the little girl that was born. This is the mom. The girl's talking about the mom, I think.
On her first day in prison, she screamed all day and night as she desperately needed some vitamins for her baby. Her baby was the only thing that was left for her. She had to scream at the top of her lungs over and over again until she no longer could. For the
I'm actually so curious. If you're pregnant and go to jail, how does that work?
finally ask her what she wanted. She screamed because she was alone, screamed because she was miserable, screamed because her dark thoughts had taken over her,
Wow, relatable on that last one. What?
screamed because of hunger, exhaustion, and pain. She screamed and screamed nonstop. And because she spent the last 5 months of her pregnancy screaming, no one knew that while it was just her 5th month in prison, it was actually her 9th month of pregnancy.
Dude, this is like super depressing on a lot of levels, and you gotta feel for this mom. Like it was an innocent murder.
And she was screaming because the time had come. Nobody knew that the time had come for her to give birth until I joined her in her screams when I was finally born. Didn't matter so much though. The only difference was that the supervisor upsized her meals so that it would be enough for the 2 of us.
Why would they not take the baby out? What kind of prison is this?
The other prisoners looked out for Mom a bit more after she'd
Okay.
given birth. Although I don't have any memory of those tough days, I can honestly say that my mom's face was the only thing that kept me alive in the absence of the proper health care.
I feel like as a prisoner, if I were locked up, this would actually give me like so much more reason to want to live.
Prison was originally designed to break a person mentally, emotionally, and physically. My mom was pushed to the verge of madness while she was still a kid, but the only
boy.
thing that kept whatever was left of her sanity
me.
intact was me.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's gonna give you some reason.
When I started to learn to talk, I learned the word grandmother from my mom. She used to
Whoa, hold up. I don't think you want to be telling about Granny. She just encouraged you to murder. I mean, isn't she like the reason you're here?
stories about my grandmother, who never visited us. curious. My
Okay,
mom
then.
knew that I was the only family she had left, but I couldn't help thinking that somewhere behind the walls of the prison, I had a grandmother.
Dude, you don't want to meet this lady. I'm telling you, I saw her. I saw what she did. She's gonna convince you to kill someone.
Say that even though there was no blood relationship between me and the women and girls who were imprisoned with my mom, they were still like family to me.
Oh,
None of
that's
the
sweet.
guards cared about me, except one. Her name was Zoya. She had Russian
Zoya?
roots and she used to bring me clothes and diapers. She was the one who gave me my name Vera, Hope, in Russian. She even taught me how to read and write when I turned 6, wanting to prepare me for the day on which I'd get out of prison to see a world I had no clue about. One day after she'd spent almost a whole day trying to convince me to sit and learn, I asked her, why would I learn to read and write if there's nothing for me to read or write about around?
Wow, she's kind of right. There's no reason to read or write if you're trapped in prison.
She answered, who said that there's nothing to read? There are millions of books out there that are full of stories and information about everything in the world. Then I was curious, so I asked, and how can I get these books? She said, tomorrow I will bring you some comic books. I waited by the cell gate holding onto the bars waiting for Zoya to come, but she never came. I sat day after day in the same spot
Where's your
waiting
mom?
for her to show up. She never did. Finally, I asked one of the guards who'd taken her place, and she told me that Zoya wasn't coming back. Eventually, the hope I'd had about getting the books started to fade, but that was far from the worst thing that was about to happen to.
How is that far from the worst? You've been locked up as a child since you were born. You tell me it gets even worse?
My mom started treating me differently. She was moody all the time, and I could hear her crying all night. She no longer liked talking to me or sitting next to me while we ate. Can you imagine what it's like to be avoided by the only person you have in the whole world?
Yes.
I endured weeks and months of neglect. I didn't know what to do. One day I couldn't take it anymore. I was so mad about the way my relationship with my mom had changed. A woman who was a few years younger than my mom approached me and asked me to move away from the corner in which I was sitting because she wanted to sit in it. I refused, so she pushed me. I fell on the floor and cut my hand. I learned in prison that everyone wants to be the tough guy, so they won't fall victim to someone else who's stronger. Everyone struts around to show how tough they are, but I didn't need to prove how tough I was to anyone. Everyone treated me like a child, but suddenly they had all stopped doing that.
What, did she just suddenly like hit the age where she didn't look like a child anymore? Like what is happening?
And I didn't understand
Maybe it's a
why.
dream.
I couldn't just sit back and not do anything about what that woman had done to me. So I stood
bad
up,
idea.
dusted
No.
myself off, and
No.
pushed her back. But she was so big. The rest of the prisoners surrounded us and started to chant, fight, fight, fight. But the fight was over before it had even begun. Some prison guards approached us to break up the fight. One of them grabbed me by the hand and took me to the office of the chief prison warden. While we were on our way, and without any warning, she punched me in the chest. She treated me exactly like one of those prisoners. That punch somehow took my breath away, but I didn't fight back, as a prisoner's card always loses to the guard's card. I only looked at her with great
Did they just design that like a Yu-Gi-Oh card? You know I saw that.
anger and frustration. I looked around everywhere trying to find my mom, but I couldn't find her. Suddenly, my anger turned into gut-wrenching sobs. That guard saw the anger and misery burning in my eyes, so she looked at me and said, "Your eyes will get you in a lot of trouble. You have to understand that there's no place for you here, but if you ever want to have a chance of surviving outside these walls, you have to first survive inside."
What is going on in this prison?
Life outside isn't that different from life in here. She extended her hand to shake mine, which in the prison world meant that she respected me. I went into the office of the chief prison warden. I saw a pile of papers in front of him. Photos of me and my mom were on top of it. I wasn't sat in front of him because of the fight. Instead, he was about to tell me the news that would change my entire life for the worse. "You are getting out of jail," he told me in a cold voice. He then said, "There's a family that is going to adopt you.
Oh, that's why the mom was mad, because she's being taken away. And the prisoners were jealous.
And your life here will be a thing of the past." My life in that place would not only be a thing of the past, it would be over. Forever. The procedures were faster than I expected them to be. Within 2 hours, I had my stuff packed.
2
and I
hours?
was
Okay,
waiting
that's
in
pretty
front of
short
the
notice
cell
to
for
lose
the
your mom.
family that was adopting
that's
me.
actually so
I
sad.
sat there waiting for the unknown. Who was this family, and where were they taking me? And as for my mom, well, she didn't even show up to say goodbye. Why, though? A tall man wearing a suit and a short, fat woman who was wearing a colorful
short,
dress
fat woman?
arrived. The way they looked was strange to me. Why is the lady wearing gloves? I asked myself. The weather wasn't cold. Let's
Probably 'cause
just
she's
say
rich.
that our first meeting was okay, but not exactly comforting. First, I'd been abandoned by Zoya, and then by my own mom. Prisons are supposed to rehabilitate the prisoners to help them give up on the emotions of anger and help them to start over with a new life.
Brutal.
However, prison only taught me how to stay in a corner that was full of rage, desperation, and frustration. as a 7-year-old girl who had never had the chance to explore other sides of my personality.
This is miserably sad, and I feel sad, and everything's sad.
They were suspiciously calm. I felt like they were plotting something.
What if they
But
were?
To my surprise, it turned out that being calm was the normal state of a human being, and
Oh, wow. I feel like people are hearing that like, wait.
Wait, what? You're supposed to be calm all the time? I didn't know that.
the other way around, and that I was the one who was constantly in an abnormal state. After a while, I began to like them, but absolutely nothing was going to replace the love I had in my heart for my mom. We tried over and over again to visit my mom in
Oh,
prison,
no.
but she refused to see us. Years went by, one after another, and I
Oh my
turned
gosh.
16. The picture of my mom's face started to fade away from my memory. I had
You know, I really relate to this one on a level that I'm not comfortable with, and I don't like it.
hadn't seen her for ages, so my memories of her were vanishing quickly.
Wow.
Even though life turned out to be pretty exciting and full of different experiences and adventures, I constantly missed my birthplace, prison. One day, I was sitting at a coffee shop reading a book
Can you imagine saying that? I missed my birthplace. I missed.
Prison.
when the same prison guard that punched me in the chest years ago walked in. I didn't recognize her at first glance. People tend to change as the years go by, and she wasn't wearing her uniform. But
Oh,
This is the one that was like kind of chill, but like not the super chill one. She's like kind of nice.
I heard her ordering a cup of coffee. I turned around and looked at her. I knew her by her voice. I still remember what she told me on my last day in prison. If you want to survive outside these walls, you have to first survive in here. Life outside isn't that different from life in here. Believe me when I say that a prisoner and a prison guard are two faces of the same coin. I started a conversation with her. She was my only hope left for getting answers to all the unanswered questions that I'd lived with for years. Hi, I said in a faint voice. She stared at me for a few moments like she was trying to figure out where to place me. Vera, is that you? She asked in a surprised tone. I was so happy that she remembered me. I was
Wow.
very excited and felt that I wanted to shower her with questions. But the first question that I asked her
Oh.
turned her surprised face into a frowned one. I asked her how my mom was. Her answer shattered my heart into
Oh, no.
pieces. I wasn't expecting the answer that I
Oh,
got
God.
from her, especially as I thought all these years that my mom didn't want me and that she had had enough of me. But the reality was that my mom was living her days out like some kind of nightmare, missing
Oh God, this is getting super depressing.
me so much. The guard told me that she had been mourning our parting every single day since the day I'd left prison, but she was always saying, I did it for her own good.
The mom sent her out? How could, hold on. So she said I did it for my own good, which means she's the one who made the choice, which means she could have made that choice when she was like a baby instead of when she was like 7.
Wanted me to leave prison for my own good, then why had she refused to see me every time I went to visit her?
Good point.
It didn't make sense to me at all. But the guard's answers cleared up some stuff for me. The day that Zoya left wasn't just her last day in prison, it was also her last day outside. She died that day. Bear the sight of me waiting by the cell gate for Zoya to return every single day. I was
Oh
too
my
young to
God.
understand life and death, and my mom didn't want our parting to be that hard as well. She always knew
Oh.
that when I would turn 7, the prison management would look for a family that would take care of me. That was why she wanted me to be tough, to be able to make it outside alone. And she wanted me to make sure that I didn't feel homesick for
They're just dropping bombs right now of information. Holy crap, that's awful.
prison in any way. I went back home that day feeling indescribable sadness for my mom. I decided I would do everything in my power to see her again, but I never imagined that seeing her again would cost me my freedom. That same day, I rushed back home to tell Mr. and Mrs. Thompson about what had happened. When Mr.
Uh-oh.
Thompson saw me, he asked me to join them. Vera,
Her
come
dad.
and say hi to your dad, he said. After all these years? My dad? What was he doing there? What had they been speaking about? I
What?
understood that he'd come to get me. He kept on asking Mr. and
No.
Mrs. Thompson about the money that they received to take care of me, how they got paid, and how much money they gave me as a monthly allowance. He didn't ask a single question about me. It was so weird that I suspected for a second time that he might be a fraud. And when he finally finished his speech saying that he will return the next week to get me, I yelled in the face of everyone present, "He's a fraud! I don't have a dad! And if I had one, he would have come to see me a long time ago." Mrs. Thompson took me to my room and told me that I really was his daughter, and that he had
No.
my birth certificate which proved his claim. There was
I don't think you can just take a baby like that, can you? Can you like adopt a baby and be like, yo, you know what? I want it back now that it's raised. I'll take it. Thank you.
There's no way I could refuse to live with him, but the thought of moving in with him really frightened me. Imagine living with a stranger, alone. It seriously terrified me. I said my goodbyes to Mr. and Mrs. Thompson a week later and promised to keep in touch with them. For the second second time I had been forced to leave my family against my will. Man knew absolutely nothing about gentleness. He was foul-mouthed and never stopped swearing. He yelled senselessly at everything.
Yo, his eyes look like little microphones.
One time he was getting out of his car to go into his house. I watched him through the window while he yelled and stomped, steam coming out of his ears.
Oh,
I was
no.
wondering what all the fuss was about until I went out to discover that he was fighting with a tiny mouse that had jumped up in front of him. But
Yo, that's the cutest looking thing I've ever seen. This guy is heartless, apparently.
it did not stop at that. In addition to all of this, my own dad was using me. Yes, that's right. He was taking advantage of me. The only reason he had come looking for me was because of money. He didn't even think that what he was getting because of me was enough. He forced me to leave school to look for a job at a bar so that he could take whatever money I made while he stayed home watching TV. Little by little, he started
Oh
to
my
become aggressive
gosh.
towards me. He never gave me anything to eat or drink and started to yell in my face for no particular reason.
This is horrible.
One time I told him that I wanted to see my mom. He refused, and that was the breaking point for me. He shut the windows and locked me in the
Oh
house for more than a
my-
week. I could
What?
no longer stand living like that any longer.
This story literally started way up here, and it was like, okay, that's a little worse, a little worse, a little worse. We just keep going down, down, down. There is absolutely nothing redeeming and good about this so far.
A sweet woman like my mom was rotting in jail, while an evil, despicable person like my dad was free to do anything he pleased. It was so unfair. It's sad to say that when I was in prison, I heard women speaking about the crimes that they were willing to commit when they got out of jail. I now understood that what they were speaking about was their own little plan to get back in. Maybe they understood that the world outside prison was far more dangerous than the one within.
This is a true thing that people actually do, which is why I even more now believe the story than before. This is so crazy to me.
Never before could I have imagined that the day would come when I would be making a plan to commit a crime, but there I was, stuck in that house with that monster of a person. I had to do anything I could to get out of this house. I grabbed a chair and started to bash the windows of the house. Then I
Wow.
called the cops to turn myself in. The cops came and arrested me for vandalizing the house. Be the weirdest case you've ever heard of, but at least it was enough to teach my dad a lesson that he'd never forget, and put me back in prison in the process.
I mean, yo, if that's all it takes to go to prison, I feel like we're gonna need to revise them laws. It's a couple broken windows, I don't know.
The officer in charge wanted to make me go back home, but I begged him with all my heart not to send me back to the monster I'd been living with.
Wow.
I even cried hysterically so that he would let me stay in prison, but my tears weren't enough to convince him to
Heartless. Don't you think he'd be like, yo, let me investigate that and see why you really would rather be in prison with your own dad?
let me stay. So I stood up and told him, "All right, but I hope you never forget that you were the one who sent me back there." I grabbed the chair
Wow.
and I bashed the window of his office with
Dang.
it. Now, will that make me stay? I thought to myself. However, instead of being dragged back to my cell by the guards, the officer in charge asked me to sit down once again and asked me, "Why do you
Interesting.
want to stay here so much, Vera?" I told him that my life outside of prison was horrible because of my dad, and that I didn't want anything in this world except to come back and live here in prison with
Oh, I was about to say, she's gonna talk about her mom. I
my
think she's-
family, whom I
There
had
she
known
is.
since I was born. He stood up and said, "All right, then fine." You might be
No, all right, fine, we'll arrest you.
Fine, we'll put you in jail.
thinking, was it really that simple? Would someone
Yes.
who wants to stay in prison be allowed to do so? The
Yes.
answer is definitely no. That officer only knew how much it meant to me to be able to go back and live with my mom. Plus, it was the only way my dad would lose legal custody over me. The
What?
moment when they were escorting me to my cell was even better than when I discovered the school library.
What?
I probably sound like a bit of a freak, right? I had grown a lot since the last time she'd seen me, but she was the same as before, as if the years that she lived without me by her had stopped the clock for her. When
Wow.
she saw me, she looked away, but when I called her Mom, her body suddenly trembled and she lay down on the floor and broke into
Oh,
tears.
man.
I ran towards her and hugged her, and we stayed like that
Oh
for
my
10
gosh.
minutes. I broke the silence by saying, "I have come back to live with you." "But how?" she asked. So I told her the whole story. And that's how I went back to living in prison. I won't say that it was better than my life outside, but at least it was easier than living with that monster that claimed to be my dad. My mom was both happy and worried at the same time. During the period that I stayed in prison, I taught the women in there what I had read and learned from books. I wanted to get the message across to them that life was not confined to good and evil, and that no one can tell you which side you belong to. Only you can decide for yourself to either be good or evil. I turned 18 in prison, which meant that I was free to live under no legal custody. But why would I go back to living outside when my life in prison was better than ever? I decided not to get out unless my mom was with me, but that
Wow.
was not what ended up happening. One day I was wandering around the prison yard when I came across a dignified old woman that I knew very well.
Oh.
She was standing in the middle of
Wait, this kind of looks like that nice girl, doesn't it? The one that they said died?
the yard alone. She was looking at the sky. That woman was put in prison before I was even
Oh,
born.
never mind, it's not.
I approached her and asked, "Are you okay?" She nodded without even looking at me. I asked her, "Why is the sky so amusing to you? What's so exciting about it?"
Freedom.
She held my hand in hers and asked me to tell her what I was seeing when I looked at the sky. "Clouds," I answered, laughing.
I
She hit
guarantee
me on
she
the
says
back
freedom.
of my head and asked me the same question again. That time I answered with more seriousness. "I see an eagle and a plane."
Okay, never
She
mind.
asked me,
I still think
"What
I'm
is
right.
on the plane?" So I answered, "People." She said, "That's right. Now, tell me, where is this plane taking the people on board?" I answered, "I don't know. Does it matter?"
Freedom, say
It was
freedom.
only then that she stopped looking at the sky and looked at me and said in a very deep and pained voice, "You don't understand the true significance of life outside prison, do you? That plane is taking those people somewhere. Life outside of these walls goes by. It moves. It continues.
Oh
And
my
all of
gosh.
us in here, we remain stuck. We remain still. All it takes for your life to turn upside down is to look at the sky. Within a few minutes,
It's
looking at the
seriously
sky
real.
made me change all that I had ever desired in life. Suddenly, the prison that I'd struggled to get back into was no longer the right place for me. I decided to resume my education and to go
Whoa.
back to prison only to teach women about what would make their life outside the walls better. And that was
Wow.
exactly what I did. That time I got out of prison once and for all, and I only returned to it to finish what I'd started. I can now say with great confidence that prison made my life better, even when I wasn't a prisoner, and that I made the lives of many of those who were in prison better too, because I believed in the good that was in their hearts. Now I visit my mom in prison every week. I work and I continue my education to improve the situation my mom
Wow,
will find when
good
she
for
gets
you.
out of prison.
That's a big
She has
book.
been through a lot already, and I refuse to let her get out only to then experience horrible atrocities again.
I thought this was an incredible story, and that was a roller coaster. I'm glad we ended on a high note, guys. If you want to end on an even higher note, subscribe to this channel because we post a lot. Peace.